Welcome to you and welcome everyone to the fourth edition of Coffee with Ashish. And today we have a very interesting topic for discussion. Yesterday in the previous session, we talked about how GDS completely transformed the way travel used to be booked and consumed. And even though GDS was around for almost 20, 30 years, late in the 90s and early 2000s, still the entire process of booking a travel ticket or hotel was extremely manual and person dependent. And in many ways, the life of a travel agent was completely focused on doing reconciliation, paperwork, and not necessarily focused on serving the end consumer. In fact, I have a very quick cartoon to show you, which is like a internet meme that generally we all sort of used to think about travel agents, going for safaris and high flying in the airlines, but actually towards the bottom right was actually what the travel agent was doing. That was the harsh reality of the trade. But on the back burner, there were few, you know, revolutionary, krantikari entrepreneurs, and we are lucky to have one of them among us today, who was not happy with the situation and who was actually thinking of a better way to do this. And as it always happens, that the conventional wisdom always resists a change in something new which comes in. And a lot of existing travel agents and the ecosystem in general thought that nobody would ever book a ticket on their own, on their mobile or sitting at home. And there was a huge resistance in general that this cannot work. And in many ways, I think it was similar to how people used to talk about Aam Aadmi Party, that they'll probably get couple of seats, but they'll never be a serious player. And similarly, people used to think only the mature traveler would book tickets online, but OTA would never become a serious business. But it's been proven wrong in many ways. And we have among us today Dhruv Shringi, who needs no introduction. He is the founder and CEO of Yatra Online or Yatra Inc. It was founded in 2006, and only in a matter of 12 years, it has completely changed the landscape of travel industry in India and even abroad in some countries. He has led the company to a successful listing in Nasdaq, and it's the only second e-commerce company out of India to be listed on a global stock exchange. So it's a matter of great pride for us also in the travel fraternity. Dhruv was also listed by the Fortune magazine to be amongst the top 40 CEOs in India, and he has served on multiple boards. He served as the vice chairman of the Internet and Mobile Association of India. He currently serves as the chairman of the key Online Travel and Technology Committee. And from his journey in London with e-bookers, he has come a far way, and he has built a company which is not only a traditional B2C OTA, but it has spread its tentacles across B2B as well. As most of us know, that Yatra has also acquired in the past air ticket aggregators like TCI. It's also acquired Travel Guru, the domestic hotel aggregator, back in 2012. And not so long ago, it also acquired ATV Travel to attain leadership in the corporate travel. So we are in safe hands with Dhruv, who's gonna have a discussion now with Ashish and help us understand what's happening right now. All of you must have heard the news today of Facebook investing in Geo, how that's gonna completely change the landscape of travel in India. So over to a warm welcome to you, Dhruv, and over to you,
Thank you.
Ashish. And I'm gonna enjoy my coffee.
Thank you. Thank you, Karthik. Thank you for the kind words.
Yeah. Thank you, Karthik. Yes, as we speak today, we have a 5.7 billion US dollar investment from Facebook into Reliance Jio. And having worked with Reliance myself, I'm imagining whether WhatsApp will move the WeChat way, where it becomes a complete e-commerce platform with Reliance's own strength in the retail segment. So that's one thought I have at the back of my mind, and obviously I'll request you to elaborate. But before I get into it, let's look at the current times. There was a report that by 2021, the internet penetration in the travel activity would go up from 21% to 35%. Now, it could be any percent, but that was what is in the report, and even expected to go to 43. Now, I'm not talking about the absolute GMV numbers as to what the numbers would be. We know what that position is. But the question in front of you is that, do you still seeing that in track? Or do you see it at an increase, specifically when we are hoping and thinking that the demographics of the travelers 65 and above would feel, and there'll be a younger audience wanting to travel. And when I look at this, I will of course look at it not only India as a source market, but I would also look at it at global source markets into India. So Dhruv, how do you paint the picture overall with where we stand today?
Sure. I think, firstly, afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I know these are very difficult circumstances, and I hope everyone is safe and sound. The travel industry is going through a completely unprecedented external shock. So you read about black swans when you're growing up, and you always think those are those mythical events which will happen. Unfortunately, we are that generation who's having to live through it as we talk about it. So it is a very difficult time. But having said that, Ashish, I think humanity has prevailed over multiple big black swan events, be it the big wars that happened, be it the Great Depression that happened, to a lesser extent, the meltdown post the internet bubble bursting. All of those things have happened, and we've come out stronger. So if you look at a trend line over, look at a 5-year aggregate trend line, you'll see the curve only going in one direction. So while today it does seem that there is no end at the light of the tunnel, I think it's very important to remember that, we've been through this a few times before, and we will come out of this only stronger. But only those companies will come out of this stronger who use this opportunity to fundamentally change the way they do business. I think one thing is for sure, Ashish, that travel will not remain the way it was before. So just like 9/11 changed airport security forever, I think this time around COVID-19 will end up changing the travel process also very meaningfully. It will still evolve into what direction it takes, what incremental steps get taken. But I think companies which are one step ahead of the curve on adopting some of these new changes that come our way will be the ones who will survive. As far as digitization is concerned, and that was your specific question, I think the trend for digitization will only accelerate. I mean, you see what's happening at this point in time with all of us imprisoned literally within our homes. You're only able to do those things which are digital. You're not able to do anything that involves anything physical outside your own premise. You're completely dependent on entertainment, on digital. Even your own health and fitness is digital. So people who are watching, online apps or following, people like CultFit and all of that, right? Providing services digitally. Your education is digital. My kids log into their school early morning and they are logged into their school till 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So every service that you're consuming as of now is largely digital. So from that perspective, when things do come back to normal, the process for digital adoption of travel, to my mind, will go through a hockey stick. Right? So companies have to really think and take this time as an opportunity to become digital.
Right.
So you can either say that, listen, our industry is in a bad shape. I'm going to be in a bad shape. So let me just withdraw into a shell. Or you can take the view and say, this is an opportunity for me where I'm not flying at 30,000 feet and have to change engines. I'm grounded. I can use this opportunity to change my engines, to change the way I do business and adopt digital in a much more meaningful manner as compared to what I've done earlier.
Right. And for the sake of the audience, I think we must clarify when we talk about technology, automation, digital, we aren't specifically referring it to what we call traditionally a B2C. I mean, any kind of business you are in when travel is digital. Otherwise, it's only a tool.
See, the point around digital is that you have to look at how do you do business in a seamless fashion? How do you do business in a fashion which involves much lower cost than what you currently incur and which is much more scalable?
Right.
If you achieve these objectives, then you will end up being digital, right?
Right.
And we've seen this. I'll give you an example. Today, we are by far the largest corporate travel player in the country. Some of our biggest players and biggest customers, so let's say a PwC, a KPMG, an EY, an Airtel, ICICI Bank, HDFC, these guys are online. These are guys who are using the self-book platform.
Right.
When I was trying to pitch this idea of self-book
Right.
on corporate travel back in 2014-15, my own team would not believe it. But fast forward like 4 or 5 years, and today more than half our corporate travel transactions. So let me put that in perspective, right? The largest corporate travel in the company has more than half their transactions happening digitally.
Right. So talking about penetration, obviously we expect 2, 3, 4, 5 cities to be touched by the digitalization, because even the government of India is trying to spread the cause of Udan as for the airlines are concerned, regional airlines. So I think it will touch the life even to the smallest guy in Bareilly, technically, or Surat. Would you say that?
See, today there are two big changes which have happened from an infrastructure point of view. One, the cost of smartphones in India is tremendously low. And second, the cost of data consumption in India is phenomenally low. India has one of the lowest data rates globally, and our data consumption today is the highest in the world.
Right.
So earlier, the apprehension that people used to have is that we don't have access to internet or our internet is slow.
Sure.
Most of those challenges are today out of the window.
Right.
I will give you an example for us. When we had to really switch to working from home, our initial apprehension was, and I got this feedback from admin and other teams, we don't have enough data cards. So how will our people move on?
Sure.
Everyone, all 2,000 people who are today working from home have smartphones, have reasonably good internet connection. So they can just hook onto their own hotspot and get going.
Right.
So I think the infrastructure challenges that we faced from a digital infrastructure point of view back in the early to mid 2000s, those are all behind us.
And when I analyze things, something stares at me very, very blatantly, and that's the vernaculalization in India. Now, India is many countries into one. If you look at our inbound operators, they're very happy to have their websites and programs working in Spanish and German and Italian. And I wonder how Kanta Ben sitting in Surat is able to go through that website, or somebody in Jamshedpur or Bareilly. I mean, how do you address the vernaculization contents? It has to happen.
Sure. I think, I look at that with a slight caveat. There are two different things out here at play. One, when you look at the number of unique travelers, so we last year, I think, had 140 odd million domestic trips that got taken. If you look at the number of unique travelers who took that trip, you're looking at roughly 40 million unique travelers.
Right.
Those 40 million people who are actually traveling, and I'm looking at aviation, and I'll come to, rail and bus separately.
Right.
On the aviation side of things, at least, have working knowledge of English, most of them.
Right.
I mean, 99% of them will have working and functional knowledge of English. But then comes the next part of the market. So that part of the country, that 40 million, is today more or less addressed. You don't need to worry too much about vernacular for them. You start going down there from people who are taking domestic holidays by rail and road. And then when you start looking at that segment, that is where vernacular will come in. In the environment that we were in earlier, the focus largely was on these 40 million people.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
In the world that we are getting into now, that 40 million will be scaling back their travel. So if you want to build a business out today and get back anywhere even remotely close to where you were, you will have to expand the purview of your business.
Right.
If you think those 40 million themselves will be able to offset the drop in revenue that you've seen right now, I think that would not be a correct assumption, because people will scale back. So if I was traveling internationally last year, I'll travel domestically now. If I was staying domestic 5-star, I will look at domestic 4. So similarly, the spend levels will come down. So if you want to achieve the same level of business, you will have to expand your customer base. And once you start thinking about that, then you need to start thinking vernacular.
Right. So while you think vernacular and everybody talking about domestic, what makes me shudder is the contents which are available for destination. They are in desperate hands. You will have some with Lonely Planet, some with OTA, some with Government of India. I mean, today, if you want to build a large demand for a domestic traveler, you've got to have a warehouse of contents which are easily accessible to any point of sale. In fact, that point of sale actually becomes a point of experience for me,
Sure.
where I should be able to, either by way of API or white labels or whatever, just to convey the demand. I mean, shouldn't the government and the private get into kind of a partnership to get it? I mean, look at Outlook Traveler, somebody who I work very closely with. They got humongous amount of digital contents. But what are they doing with it?
Right.
How do we get that moving?
Sure. I think there are entrepreneurs who are working on the vernacular content as well. There are people like Google as well who've got Google Translate, which is running, which allows you to translate some for English content into vernacular languages. So there is a lot of work that's happening in the background. But the point that I think is valid that you're making is it's not something which is happening in a very focused and structured manner. There are various pockets who are working on this in isolation, as opposed to there being one concentrated effort towards it. But I do also think that the way now what you've seen with Geo and Facebook coming together, I think you'll see a much bigger proliferation of vernacular content happening on the back of this partnership.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, but I would imagine, I would certainly like to recommend to Government of India to play a role at the state or center to put this whole partnership in place. Now, I did a project a few years ago with a company known as Usha Breco. These are the guys who carried people up on religious sites in Haridwar and Gujarat, Mancha Devi, Chanda Devi, and on a build, operate, transfer.
Right.
And I spent a lot of time on their sites where the aerial ropeways were operated out of. And one thing hit me, that the size of the religious and the pilgrimage market in India is huge, right? So huge that people were prepared to walk for miles and miles and miles. Like they said, faith can move mountain. They were prepared to walk for miles and miles to be able to visit the shrine. Then I came to know that there were about 63 shrines, which are well known in all faiths, which are very up high in the hills, which are not accessible. And there were proposals pending for building ropeways so that access could increase, etc. But they were lying dust and gathering dust. So the point I'm trying to make that, again, when we talk about domestic tourism, I think the backbone of the domestic tourism would have to lie in building the unorganized pilgrimage and yatra market into a more organized end-to-end entity than we see it today. Just helicopter rides to Vaishno Devi or doing a Char Dham for me is not what I'm really referring to.
I think that's absolutely spot on. The next level of spends which will happen will first happen for religious travel. Because when people have a limited amount of disposable income and they want to travel beyond, traveling for weddings, then, other reason people will travel is for religious purposes. So for that next mass market, the first spend will happen towards religious before it moves on to pure leisure. So if I have 100 rupees only that I can spend on travel, I will first spend that 100 towards religious travel. And only after that, the next time around, look at leisure. So from that perspective, I think infrastructure building is very important. The infrastructure in a lot of these facilities is still very rudimentary. It is quite challenged. So infrastructure building in these markets is going to be quite important. In parallel to that, you'll have content also being built up and content being digitized and people being able to book it online. But infrastructure also will need to, catch up with this.
Yeah. And the advantage of this is, of course, the large NRI market outside, because whereas you may not get foreign tourists to come in, but you can certainly get NRIs to come and visit if you market well.
Sure.
Right. So that'd be a case for pilgrimage. The other case I have in terms of demand creation and promotion are these film shoots. Now with the contents, be it on Netflix, be it in every digital media you see. And we've seen destinations like Switzerland, etc., rise on the back of Shah Rukh Khan's getting on the Alps, right? I would certainly like to see the directors, the producers, the Government of India, the funding bodies come together to actually concretely put this into perspective and showcase this out. What do you say to this?
Sure. I think that's an interesting thought again, Ashish, but I've always been skeptical about that, right? The reason being, if you look at the size of that market, so from a market sizing point of view, how large is that market and is that a priority market as of today? And I have never been able to convince myself that that market is a large enough market to go after and try and build out today.
But would
Now,
it not create demand when people see this on the films, the locations?
sure, I agree with you, but I think there is so much that still needs to be done on our infrastructure, that promoting a destination with substandard infrastructure in the background is not really going to drive demand. So I think there is a big dichotomy over there. We can't just keep relying on showcasing Taj Mahal and saying that will drive demand to India.
Right.
Right. The infrastructure on the ground first needs to, improve before you can do that.
Right.
And that is the big challenge in this today.
Right.
Right. So that's the reason why I'm a bit skeptical when it comes to, film tourism for that matter, because I do feel that unless the underlying infrastructure improves, you're not able to get, that customer to come to you.
Right. I think another point to be noted as far the government is concerned and state governments are concerned.
Right.
Lastly, of course, before we open up for any questions, is my favorite discussion is today. India is no less where it comes to technology. I mean, some of the largest companies, be it TCS or be it Wipro, be it Infosys, come out of India, and they handle projects all over the world. If that be so, why can't India build its own multinationals as far as travel is concerned? And when I say that, if you look at a typical website or an online player, and an offline doesn't make a difference, why should I not be able to, and why should I be working on a draconian principle of the Reserve Bank of India that I am not able to cater to a Japanese guy who wants to get into Europe to join one of the programs I have and so on? So he should be able to come in as well. And it is draconian because the same money, to my mind, can come into India. You can keep your margin and remit the balance. So there would be, and what would happen ultimately, I believe, that the relationship between that Japanese DMC will become stronger for him to even look at you for India. What do you say, Dhruv, to that?
So I think, again, on that, Ashish, while on the face of it, there is merit in doing that, right? And RBI should definitely relax those norms. I think those norms are archaic, to say the least. But the challenge, again, if you look at it from a commercial standpoint, right, and from an economic standpoint, we are talking about, let's say, US-based companies or China-based companies expanding overseas and becoming multinational players. They're able to do that because they've got a home market advantage where they've got a captive audience and a large enough market where they're making money that they're investing overseas. In the Indian context, unfortunately, we don't have that large a travel market.
Right.
So when you think about a business, right, a business needs to have a core which is well protected, well defended, and is highly profitable. And then you can use that core to invest outside. In India, we still haven't gotten to that stage. And the reason being, and I think there are parts of travel where it's happening, there are parts where it still hasn't. On the consumer travel part, it still hasn't happened because the consumer market is relatively shallow. And I mean in terms of spends, not in terms of number of people. Our spend levels on travel are one of the lowest across the globe. So if you look at what we spend on domestic travel today, that's one of the lowest, right? So spend per capita has to go up for you to have a large enough domestic market. That is one big challenge which is there today that companies suffer. There are other parts of the business where it's beginning to happen. So for example, on the technology side, like you mentioned, there is technology that has been built by people on the B2B space. There's technology which has been built on the corporate space. And that technology now is being transported to other markets. On the B2B side, you've got Via, which is a good example of it. You've got TBO, which is another good example of the same, right? On the corporate side, you've seen Zilius try and make that effort in terms of going to other international markets. We are trying to do similar things, right? So that's beginning to happen. It's happening because of that same reason, that you've got a good, strong, healthy, profitable core business out here, which is allowing you to invest overseas.
Right. So very quickly, with funding drying up, cash being the king, do we expect it may be a popular question from the audience.
Hmm.
Do we expect the online companies who have been accused of predatory pricing, deep discounting, customer acquisition at any cost coming
Right.
to a level field now?
I think firstly, that question itself is wrong and that perception is wrong. I mean, we're a public listed company, right? Um, in the October, November, December quarter, our EBITDA was 22 crores in the quarter,
Yeah.
right? So if we are able to make that kind of money in a quarter, that kind of money is not being made by predatory pricing and just deep discounting.
Right.
It's happening because there is a business, there is a brand that customers can relate to, and there is a service which is being provided that customers value. I think the discussion, while it is correct to a certain extent that there has been deep discounting in the past and there are some players who do indulge in that, I think the broader point around the service and the customer experience gets diluted because of that.
Right.
A lot of people feel that it's only deep discount which is driving it. They don't think about the experience which is being provided, which is getting a customer to come back multiple times.
Right.
And I also put this across to people who raised this question to me on numerous occasions, is that if you are providing a great experience to your customer, he's not going to move. The issue is the customer experience. Now, obviously, there'll be times when there is a ludicrous offer running somewhere, and that will happen across all categories. But that will be more the exception as opposed to the norm.
Yeah.
So the fact that our customer experience that we provide does not create a sticky enough customer relationship is the challenge, and not that the deep discount is the challenge.
I agree 100% on that. So, Karthik, it's over to you. We'll probably take in two questions for Dhruv.
Sure. So one of the questions we have got is from Mr. Narayan Malapur, who probably had some discussion with Dhruv back in 2011, where it was mentioned that Google could be a big competitor in the Indian travel industry, and with you also mentioning, Dhruv, that Google is doing a lot of work in vernacular and in the related ecosystem. So do you see Google becoming like a catch-all platform, including travel as well?
See, and this is what I told Narayan then, and I still believe this now. Google will always remain a threat. So if you're a player in the online space, there are 3-4 companies who you have to always view as a threat. So Google would be one, Facebook would be another one, Amazon would be a third, right? So some of these guys, because of the size, scale, and the wherewithal that they have, you will always have to think of them as a threat and see what is it that they are doing and what can you do differently to retain your own space in the market. Google in the US, you see the Google Flights business and the Google Hotel Search Finder has hit people like Trivago and TripAdvisor and Kayak very severely. I mean, these companies have lost tens of billions of market cap, right? And they've lost it because of Google. So at some point, Google will, it I think is always a threat and will continue to be a stronger one as the years go by. The advantage for India at this point in time, I think there's a small window of opportunities that the market I don't think is large enough for Google to put too much resources behind it.
Okay.
If the market in India had exploded like it was envisaged to explode, I would have thought Google would have been much stronger on the ground.
Okay. The last question we have is from Abhishek Sharma, and he mentioned that with the whole concept of physical or social distancing coming in, and people are talking about how the flight layouts will change, one passenger per row, and all those things coming in. So pricing is expected to be in the range of 2x to 3x, which is not a a reasonable level from a demand perspective. So how do you see that affecting the travel patterns and the volumes in the coming months?
Yeah, I think some of you would recall that back in the mid 90s, late 90s, a Delhi Bombay flight used to cost 15,000-20,000 rupees, right? It would be north of 10,000 at least a return flight. It wasn't the case that your return flight would be 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 rupees, right? So we are looking at that era, and because capacity will be constrained, the demand and capacity to that extent, I think, will end up matching.
Okay.
It's not great for the industry overall. It's not great for the country overall for the aviation market to get squeezed like that. But unfortunately, at this point in time, given the current scenario with COVID, there doesn't seem to be any other solution to that effect. at least not until the vaccine is out and people are well vaccinated across the board. That challenge will remain. The only saving grace in all of this could potentially be oil prices. We've all been seeing what's happening to the oil prices, and that does create a lot of buffer for the airlines to be able to price aggressively.
Right.
Aggressive is again a relative term, but for most airlines, oil would account for almost 45 to 55%, depending on what aircraft, what engine they are flying, of their operating cost. So if there is such a meaningful drop on that larger cost for running the operation, there might still be some relief for the Indian travelers.
Okay, fair enough. So over to you, Ashish, for any closing remarks, and then we'll conclude this.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for being with us today, Dhruv, and I hope you enjoyed your coffee. And my takeaway from this session, of course, there were many, and it was great talking to you as always, is that, we've all catered to that 40 million passenger mark, which you said was easy to get, or easy rather, English-based and so on. And there's going to be enormous dropout from there. So there has to be a replacement for that dropout. And that replacement from the dropout would have to come in from putting in digital contents, be it on vernacular, be it on the technology platform, so that we create an overall demand. It's just not good enough for us to say, oh, domestic will revive. I mean, either you let it revive on its own, or you actually create a demand and actually channel it into a direction you want it to go. Because unchecked demand or unheralded demand is not the great thing when you're building an industry from ground. Here's an opportunity to actually build an industry from the ground. One of the thoughts which go to my mind is I certainly wouldn't like to see domestic tourism go through the roof the same way, where I see trash being discarded on the roads, on the beaches, on the hilltop, etc. Let's put all our heads together to actually grow the demand in a channeled manner now that we have an opportunity. So Dhruv, that's my biggest thought going forward.
No, I think that's very well summarized, Ashish. I completely agree with you that there is a great opportunity in this, mayhem as well, to put some structure to the domestic industry. And if we don't do that, I think as an industry, we'd be doing a big disservice to us.
Right.
It's incumbent upon the key players in the industry, upon the key constituents of the industry like yourself, to help make sure that the industry progresses in the right direction, and we all push our effort in unison. The worst thing that can happen is all of us start pulling in different directions, and then the industry growth happens in a very haphazard manner.
Right.
So I think that's very well summarized, Ashish. Thank you.
Thank you, and I look forward to that actual coffee and not a Zoom coffee with this.
Yes, yeah. Look forward to it as well. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Dhruv. Thanks, Ashish. Thanks, everyone. Stay safe. Stay at home.
You too.
Have a great day.